Black Chaos comes again. Book 1, Black Land. Episode 5, Oscar's Story by Alan O.W. Barnes.
The following day, I discovered I couldn't do anything right. My hair was a worse mess than usual. I had no clean clothing that was also fitting and school appropriate. Eventually, I gave up and put on some jogging pants and a t-shirt. I went to school and tried to pretend as if nothing had happened. We all did. I felt smaller, more vulnerable than I've ever felt in my life. I'd experienced death so visceral that it made everything else feel unreal. I felt kind of weird about it, dirty. I've had relatives die, but their passing didn't affect me the same way. It didn't make sense that I should be this upset over the death of a girl who hated me. I guess I didn't hate her as much as I thought. Maybe this feeling is what caused the Egyptians to try and defy death. Perhaps this feeling is why so many humans hope for a resurrection. There was an assembly that morning. The principal said nice things about Veronica. He assured all of us that counselors were available if anyone needed to discuss their feelings, and he encouraged us to take advantage of those school counselors. I noticed a small circle of Veronica's friends weeping in the bleachers, including Deborah Sinclair and Heather McNeil. Oskar was still nowhere to be seen. When I arrived at the journalism club, I was not surprised to find that Oskar did not come to school. I was surprised to discover that he was not the authorities' main suspect. I was even more outraged to learn Mr. Filan had put Oskar on the strategy board with an assignment to write the story of Veronica's death. "Are you insane?" I blurted at Filan in response to the strategy board. Mr. Filan seemed genuinely surprised by my reaction.
Oskar knew Veronica better than anyone in this room. He's the obvious choice.
Sure, if you want a first-hand account from the killer. Mr. Filan and the other journalism students just stared at me, confused. I crossed my arms, feeling insecure. He was the last person to see her alive. They went off in a dark corner together, and the next thing we knew, she was riddled with cuts in that very same dark corner. Surely they all saw the clarity of my conclusion. Her ragged voice cut through the ensuing silence of the room. The voice instantly converted my outrage to anxiety.
Do you really think I could do that to Ronnie?
It was Oskar, standing in the doorway, unshaven, hair disheveled, wearing the same clothes he'd worn the night before, and glowering at me as though I'd just stabbed him in the back. Maybe I had.
Oskar, you okay? How did the interview with the police go?
Oskar's movements felt deliberate, but encumbered. Exhaustion teemed off him as he fell into a chair near his desk. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I'd noticed from him a lot. He must hold his tension in his shoulders.
They asked me where I was, and I explained that I'd only left her alone for a few minutes.
Looking directly at me, he added,
Security footage proved I was on the other side of the building in the bathroom when Ronnie was attacked.
"So they have video of the attack?" I asked, hoping the police already knew who to look for, but also hoping I would never have to see that footage. Oskar shook his head.
There were no cameras in the corner where Ronnie and I...
Oskar paused, wisely deciding not to overshare.
We made certain we weren't anywhere the security guards could watch.
Everyone sat silently for another moment. We were all still in shock. I was perplexed because now the only suspect I had was a mummy cat, but that seemed like something out of a bad horror movie or an old Bram Stoker novel. Not the one about the vampire, the one about the curse.
The other murders last night were even more bizarre,
said Oskar. I stared at Oskar. There'd been more murders last night? I had no idea. I was suddenly confronted with a realization. For months, I'd believed Oskar was a privileged ass. But while I went home and slept comfortably in my bed trying to forget what I'd just seen, he stayed out all night, learning what he could about the murder and staying up to date about other similar events around town. Maybe it was circumstance. He had to go with the police and answer questions. While there, who knows what he could have overheard. I'm starting to suspect that part of the mathematical formula for success is being in the right place at the right time, which is challenging to engineer. A man cleared his throat. Principal Dixon interrupted us, pulling me away from my thoughts. As the principal entered the room, a girl I'd never seen followed him. She was exotic. Dark hair, high cheekbones, wide eyes. She felt like the kind of girl destined to star in black and white movies from the 1950s, if it weren't way too late for that. She wore an ankh. I know that isn't really significant. Every goth chick and Dr. Fate fan has one, right?
Mr. Filan, we have a new student. Class, this is Seville. She's just transferred here from Europe. Make her feel welcomed.
Mr. Filan welcomed her and gestured for her to have a seat. Seville sat down next to me. I couldn't shake a feeling of familiarity. "Do I know you?" I whispered. She looked back at me and smiled.
I don't think so, but I love your hair.
"You're teasing me."
No, I love light brown hair with a little wave to it. It's so exotic where I'm from. And I love how you've pulled it up in that turquoise clip. Maybe you can show me where to get one of those later.
Oskar continued briefing the journalism class about the events of the last 12 hours.
I only left Ronnie for a minute. After her body was discovered, a security guard spotted me. He didn't tell me why he was detaining me, but he stuck me in an office to wait for the police. I had no idea what was going on. It was only later I discovered the security guard recognized me as someone he'd seen with Ronnie, or as he put it, the deceased. A couple of uniformed police officers arrived first. They didn't say much, but eventually a plainclothes detective came and asked me a bunch of questions. Frankly, none of the questions made sense until I understood they were asking me if I killed Ronnie. That's how I found out she was dead. This middle-aged dude wanted to know why I would kill such a pretty young girl. I yelled at the guy, told him I would never hurt anyone, let alone Ronnie. He pulled up a social media post about a fight I'd gotten into with a soccer player from Central last year. I explained that the guy had attacked me. I didn't provoke the attack, I just defended myself. He pointed out that the other player had suffered a lot of blood loss when I stabbed him. I explained the knife wasn't mine. He attacked me with the knife, and when I grabbed his arm, the blade just spun out of control. He said it was a pretty deep stab for an out-of-control knife. It took a while, but I finally convinced the detective that I didn't kill Ronnie. After reviewing the security footage, he realized I didn't have enough time to kill her. I didn't have time to.
Oskar lost his emotional control for a moment. I could hear his voice get tense and gruff as he choked back the tears.
I didn't have time to slice her that many times.
He concluded. Oskar's story continued.
There was a loud noise and the detective got up to investigate. I snuck out behind him, realizing there was no one guarding me. The lights were out in the museum. Those red emergency lights were on, creating an eerie environment. As I rounded a corner to the main museum chamber, I saw the detective on his knees, mumbling to himself. The detective who'd questioned me leaned over one of the uniformed detectives lying in a pool of blood. I learned later someone had removed his intestines. The detective made a call on his cell phone. He sounded desperate. While he yelled at whoever was on the other end of the line about needing backup, I was able to get closer to the body. Whoever killed the uniformed officer had stepped in the blood, and I followed a trail of bloody footsteps out of the museum. The strangest thing about those first few footprints is they were full-footed and clear. I did a footprint experiment once when I was a Cub Scout, so I'm no expert, but I have a concept of what to look for in footprints. These were naked prints. I mean, whoever made them wasn't wearing shoes. Their feet were really small, about half as big as mine, like a child or a small girl. There's no way they belonged to the killer. Someone that small couldn't have been able to overpower the comp. Still, I figured whoever made them probably saw something. Outside, I heard a scream. The scream was cut short. It sounded like the woman who was screaming had been suddenly gagged. The other uniformed cop from the museum and I arrived at the same time, and we found a couple, a man and a woman, one dead, the other dying. We discovered as the medics arrived that the man's lungs had been removed. The woman was missing her liver and her tongue.
I had a thought. You know, those are the precise organs placed in the canonic jars removed from the Egyptians upon mummification. Except for the tongue, I don't understand that one.
The stomachs were also placed in jars,
Replied Mr. Phelan.
Ronnie's stomach was removed.
Oskar mumbled. That was the ground-facing wound I'd seen last night. Oskar concluded his story.
Spent the rest of the night being interviewed by a handful of cops. They called my parents and sent me home about an hour ago. I don't know if there were more deaths. Those are just the ones I know about.
So, we have the killer's method of operation. He's a psycho-Egyptology nut, and he likes tongues, I said, looking right at Mr. Phelan. Oskar looked bemused.
How do you know it's a male killer?
Statistically, serial killers are men, especially the violent ones.
What happened to all your big talk about how a woman can do anything a man can do? It doesn't apply to serial murder?
I guess I had been pushing my feminist agenda pretty hard in this class.
I think we're getting off the point here.
Interrupted Mr. Phelan. He's always trying to shut down politically charged talk in his classroom. He didn't have to worry about it long. The bell rang, and we went our separate ways, except for Sybil, who followed me.